History Nerds Unite. My name is Brad Pomerance. We are here for an outstanding edition of Charter Local Edition. We are in the Inland Empire, and we are joined by my longtime friend, Bob Dutton. You know him well. He was GOP leader on the California State Senate. He is now the Assessor Recorder County Clerk in San Bernardino County. He brings with him Genevieve Preston, who is the San Bernardino County Archivist. I guess you could say that Genevieve is one of your staff. How is it that the archivist falls under your purview?
Well, back a few years ago, in 2001, as a matter of fact, with regards to archives, is they did some reorganization. And so they decided to put the archives under the recorder's office, because they felt that there was a great tie towards the recorder's office and archives.
Sure.
Well, after all, we record on an average day, we might do like 4,000 documents.
Really?
Has to do with the transfers of property, the recordment of easements, loans, whatever. And so we've got documents that go all the way back to 1853 when the county was first chartered, which is just a year after the state of California was admitted into the union as a state.
And that's how I found out what you were doing, because you and your staff, Robbie, God bless you, she's in the room right now. I think she operates your Facebook page, and she put a old document on your Facebook page, and I literally jumped out my chair and I started typing, "Dear Mr. Assessor, I would love to do an interview with you about some of your archival work."
Well, Brad, I think I have responsibility for three different areas or four different areas, and the archives, I think, was one of those very important parts of county government that kind of gets overlooked.
It does.
And even up in the state capitol, I was big on the history of California, the history of the Capitol. I even did some video tours of the Capitol and so forth. And I kind of wanted to do this too with archives, as I've asked Genevieve if she would actually start being prepared to give us the history of San Bernardino County as some of these cities have started to be developed and what kind of things happened in San Bernardino County. So you're going to see a lot more of that as we go on.
And hopefully this will be a continuing series of you
we
and
would
the
love
Bob
that.
and Genevieve show, if I may say. I don't know if you want that, Ms. Preston, but we'd love to have you as often as possible to learn about the history of San Bernardino County. By the way, the largest geographic county in the lower 48, about 2.23 million residents. And you have brought us a series of documents and pictures that tell the story of mining in one area of the county, but the story really informs us a lot about the early leaders of our great state. And I am so excited to go through this story. And so, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let us begin. Let's talk about silver mining in the Inland Empire, because we think about California as the Golden State, the gold rush, but sir and Ms. Preston, I mean, silver was a big deal in Southern California, is that right?
Yes, we actually have the official honor of having the official state silver rush town in our county.
And that is?
And that's Calico.
And we're going to be talking about Calico. So let us begin and let us talk about a gentleman named George Lee. George Lee filed, or I guess this is a contract that I'm looking at.
He recorded a claim.
So this is an actual recorded claim that Mr. Lee filed in 1875 in the archives of
The county, because it's a recorder record, and what he did is he wanted to make the official claim of this property. And so he was a miner out in the desert when nobody was out in the desert. It was all government land. And he came to the recorder's office, which was about a 3-day trip from the desert down there. There was no train down.
There wasn't.
And so he actually filed the claim, and he claimed it. He brought in ore and samples and various things, but he never got to fully realized the claim because he died under mysterious circumstances a few years later.
There's a lot of death in this story.
There's a lot of death.
So, sir, when someone files a claim today, for example, how do they do it?
Well, they go ahead and have to perfect their mining claim, and then at that point they'd have to file the appropriate deeds with the recorder's office.
A little easier.
A little easier. We're a little bit more sophisticated today than we was back then.
So Mr. Lee dies under strange circumstances, and then a group arrives. One of the individuals that was part of that group was a gentleman named John King. And we have a picture of Mr. King. And in 1888, Mr. King and his friends do what?
They go out and they stake a claim, and they actually make one of the biggest silver claims in the entire state. And they call it the Silver King Mine, after John King, because he provided the grub stake. So he provided all the money to go get the silver. So the silver to find the silver.
And this is a picture of the actual Silver King mine?
Yes, and that was the beginning mine for the Calico area. Before that, Calico used to be part of a different mining district. Mining districts were a strange sort of California thing and other parts of the West, in that you didn't necessarily need to go to the recorder to make your claim. You would create a mining district. The miners could actually create a group. They had bylaws. They had to have a recorder at the mining district level. But if they wanted it official, they still had to go to the county recorder to make that claim.
And so as we consider, and why don't you talk us through about how successful that mine was as I show you some pictures of Calico back in the day.
So within 2 years, they had an entire city created, Calico City. And Calico was so big, there were about 3,000 people living there. They were so remote from San Bernardino City that they actually petitioned the Board of Supervisors to have their own sheriff and their own courthouse.
And let's talk about that, because they actually filed a petition.
They filed a petition.
And here's the petition, Mr. Dutton. Here it is. And how would that work? How did it work then? How does it work today?
Well, I can't tell you how it worked back then.
Come on. So how would it work today? I mean, could you do that today?
Well, there's a process we have to go through in order for a new city or township to be created and so forth. And there's a process. It involves hearings with LAFCO.
Okay, see, so it all comes around.
Then there's also an election that takes place, because you have to adopt a charter. And you have to determine whether you're going to be a charter city, general law city. There's state laws that take care of all this today.
But back then they filed this document.
Yeah.
And you found it in the archives. I guess they also filed this map?
They filed their official map of the town site, which is very basic, as you can see. And if you've been to Calico, it's just up an angle on the mountain. And you kind of see that it kind of juts, and that's the entire map.
And you know, as you'll notice back there, back in those days, these maps were hand-drawn.
Yes.
You know, today it's a little bit different with the age of computer and so forth. We can actually create a lot cleaner document, a lot more detail to it. Back in those days, though, it was kind of an interesting process.
So tell us, if I may, either of you, about the miners themselves. I'm going to hold up some pictures of the miners. Either of you, tell us about the miners.
Well, the miners came from all over. They were most of them were, you know, had migrated from other states.
Were they Anglo, or were they of Chinese descent?
Combination.
Yeah.
There was a Chinese part of Calico, so there was an actual. And in most mining towns, they did have that. They had a section in Daggett, which is down the hill from Calico, as well, which is where the train stop was.
Okay, so when we come back, I want to talk more about what happened with the Silver King mine. There's more intrigue, there's more death, potentially murder involved in this story, including with regard to someone who became governor of our great state. We are speaking with Bob Dutton and Genevieve Preston. They are with San Bernardino County. This is Fun History Nerds. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Brad Pomerance. This show is perfect for history nerds like myself, because we are going through the history of one section of San Bernardino County. We are joined by Bob Dutton. He is the
Assessor
Recorder County Clerk of the county elected position. He is joined by the Archivist Genevieve Preston. We're talking about the Silver King mine in Calico, which is part of East San Bernardino County, a small area. And by 1884, I understand that the mine in Calico was producing a huge amount of silver. Do you know the percentages?
The Calico district alone brought in 80% of the silver in the state. 70% of the silver in the state came from San Bernardino County as a whole.
So this was a huge amount. Then we have someone enter the scene. He is someone whose name I'm sure Mr. Dutton knows as the former GOP leader of the California State Senate. It is a gentleman named Robert Waterman. And here is his picture, is that right?
Correct.
Tell us about Robert Waterman.
Well, Robert Waterman was a fascinating character. He had come during the first gold rush, actually, to California in the 1850s, but he didn't do so well in Northern California, so he went home to Illinois. While he was in Illinois, he happened to form the Republican Party with a fellow that everybody knows. His name was Abraham Lincoln.
It's crazy. Think about that. He is a father of the modern Republican Party. It's crazy. And you as a leader of the Republican Party, I mean, that's just, it just shows it all comes around.
And then he came back to San Bernardino in 1874, and he settled in a little area kind of over the hill from where the Arrowhead Springs Hotel is.
And Arrowhead is relevant to the story. We'll talk about it,
yeah.
Lake Arrowhead.
Yeah, so he settles over there, and he actually then starts trying to invest, and he gets some mining claims, and he gets some mining claims up in the what it was called the Grapevine Mining District, which is
not the Grapevine as we know it today.
No,
Yeah.
the Grapevine Mining District is right next to Calico.
And he files.
And he files the Alpha and the Omega claims.
Okay, what does that mean, Alpha and Omega?
The beginning and the end.
Nice, I had a feeling.
Yeah. So he files those claims, and he makes a lot of money and a lot of silver off those claims.
And I want to, okay, but he does more than that.
He does more than that.
Yeah, interesting character. Because he has rights to this area, what does he do?
Well, he makes sure nobody can travel through his land where he's living in San Bernardino, which we call it Waterman Canyon now, and it's the main thoroughfare up to the mountains. So nobody had access to the old Mormon road that went through there because he had complete and total control of it.
And we're showing pictures now to kind of demonstrate how his behavior as it relates to his land made it tricky.
It made it tricky, yeah, until he died. Then they sold it, and then the Arrowhead Reservoir Company was able to use it and actually bottle water out of there.
Arrowhead, Lake Arrowhead.
Yeah.
Tell us about Lake Arrowhead today, sir.
Well, it's a booming area up in our mountains. Of course, it's heavy for recreational year-round. It was never intended to be that. It was always intended to be more of a summertime, resident area, and it was never intended to have a permanent residence. But that's not the case today.
But it's a very significant part of this great county.
Well, it's part of what happens when you have a great deal of infrastructure is put in, roads, things like that, power, access to water, things of that nature, and so it happens.
But around that time, Genevieve, something happened.
Well, there was
Before he died, obviously.
Before he died, and before he became governor of our state.
Yes, governor of our state.
Before he became governor of our state, there was actually a gentleman who was brought to trial for the murder of George Lee, who made the first claim up there.
Good old George Lee?
Good old George Lee, who we don't have a picture
Oh, we don't
of,
have
unfortunately.
yeah, we have Mr. King. Yeah.
And he had died under mysterious circumstances. Well, Mr. Hoffman was brought to trial, and he said he was paid by Waterman to kill him so that he could claim his rights.
Come on.
And his claims, the Alpha and the Omega, the description matches almost verbatim George Lee's Quicksilver claim.
When was this trial?
1883.
Did he become governor? Do you know?
Not till 1886.
Oh, just 3 years later. The guy's accused of being hiring a hitman. Sir, would that happen?
The good old Wild West. What can I tell you?
It truly is. I mean,
It was a hung jury.
It was a hung jury.
It was a hung jury. Hoffman was not accused.
Right, but could you imagine that if someone ran for office today for the governor of our great state who had been accused, just accused of hiring a hitman, I don't think he'd have a shot of winning his primary. What do you think, Mr. Dutton?
I think it might be a little
A little difficult. So he was, as you said, he was first elected lieutenant governor. He then became governor upon the death of the prior. Was he elected, do you know, or did he just finish that term? Do you know?
He finished that term.
Okay, but he was governor.
He was governor.
Okay, so, and he was quite a rabble-rouser. Yeah, he made a lot of noise about the state rolls. Do you remember what he did? He was complaining about the size of the staff of the state. Sounds familiar, Mr. Dutton? You were making
True Republican.
True
you know,
Republican.
Limited government. and so
Limited
forth.
government.
But
Okay.
you got to remember, California is a big place today.
Oh, indeed.
When you go back to the 1880s, it was even bigger back then because of all the vast areas. As a matter of fact, we didn't have freeways. We used the river system for transportation from Northern California down to Southern California.
So ultimately, the area which he developed, it's not called Waterman.
No, it's not called Waterman Junction anymore.
It's called
Barstow.
Barstow, which is such a great historic town.
It
What
is.
happened? Was the accusation of hiring a hitman?
No, what
deadly to
happened
the
was
naming of the town?
when the railroad came through town, they renamed the junction after one of their own, so it became Barstow. So because he'd had the most profitable mine in that area, they'd called it Waterman Junction after Grapevine, and then because the railroad wanted their own names and their own sort of associations with it, they renamed it Barstow.
Now, what happened to Calico, though?
Well, Calico, what happened is there's the Silver Purchase Act in 1890.
Okay.
And it's one of those classic, one of the representatives from Ohio wanted to help the farmers in his state, which then didn't help the miners in our state. So it undervalued the price of silver, so it became no longer profitable to mine silver. They did find borax, and they mined that till about 1907, but then after that, it became a ghost town.
It truly became a ghost town.
It did.
But then, the nephew of Mr. King, whose name you'll know in a second, here's a picture of him. He may look familiar to you. What's his name?
Walter Knotts.
Like
Knott's Berry Farm.
Knott's Berry Farm. So what did Walter Knotts do?
He purchased the entire town of Calico, and he built it up to be an attraction. And he had wanted originally to buy the land around and make his amusement park there, but there's still silver in those mountains, and the mining.
in them there hills.
There is, and they didn't want to sell to him, so he gave it to the county park system so it would be preserved for everybody to enjoy.
And now, sir, it is
Calico Ghost Town.
Calico Ghost Town, which is thriving today. It's not near, it's close to Barstow, correct?
It is close to Barstow.
Right. And
Daggett.
And there's another epilogue to this story. Mr. Waterman was instrumental, it's kind of ironic, in the development of this complex.
The Southern California Institute for the Insane,
Oh my.
which did not always take criminally insane people.
Okay.
It does now. It's Patton Hospital, and it's one of the few still operating state hospitals.
This was the biggest treat. Mr. Dutton, Recorder Dutton, thank you so much for bringing Genevieve. It is interesting, though, how we see the names kind of come up over and over again. We see the names like Waterman, Knotts, King. These are names that are constantly on our minds.
Well, I think it's also, take a look at the impact it had on state government too, and so forth. San Bernardino County is a real fascinating county.
You're not done with me.
And,
You're stuck with me.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because I really think it's important for us to do, let people know about the archives and what Genevieve's done for us.
And you'll come back?
Oh, absolutely.
Bob Dutton, Genevieve Preston, Recorder, Archivist for San Bernardino County. I'm Brad Pomerance, Charter Local Edition.